Alright, so today is going to be a little bit different. I have an hour's drive ahead of me for work. And so rather than just sit in the car quietly thinking to myself, I thought I would rig up my iPhone to record myself so I could record a video while I was driving. We'll see how it goes. This is not usually how I do my videos. Usually I like to have a topic and have thought out what I was going to talk about. Usually I like having notes in front of me, and then obviously I sit in front of the camera and try and do the recording as quickly as possible. Usually my recording time would take about just over 10 minutes, and then in some of the longer videos I might record a total of about 20 minutes worth of video, and that gets edited down. So it's going to be a little bit different today. Obviously I don't have any notes in front of me. I'm just driving. I'm just going to ramble on about whatever comes to my mind. So it's a little bit more free form. It may not be as organized as some of my other videos, but the main thing is to pay attention to the road, not to record the video. And so I'll produce something like an hour's worth of video that I'll have to sift through later and see if there's any usable footage. So that's going to be a real pain. But I don't know, we'll give it a try. Man, traffic's pretty bad today. I just saw a car almost rear-end another car. The guy clearly wasn't paying attention to the road, and I had to pull off into the shoulder to avoid hitting the car in front of him. That's terrifying. There is a large truck up ahead that is carrying what looks like a propeller blades for one of those wind power machines. Oh Jesus, I can't think. And I think that's holding up a lot of traffic. The road looks clear ahead of that truck, but there's a ton of traffic behind this truck. Alright, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this time to talk about my history with cameras. I'm going to tell a story. So the first camera that I ever used was a Kodak film camera. I don't know what the model is, and there's no way I would be able to find out now anyway. But it was a film camera, and it belonged to the family. I was a kid at the time, so it's not like I had my own camera. And at that time, I wasn't really interested in photography. So that was just a family camera, and we would use it only if we went out on trips or for special occasions, holidays, that kind of thing. Otherwise, it sat mostly, in the drawer. And that's how it was with film cameras back in the day. It's not like nowadays where, if your cat's sleeping on the couch and looks cute, you pull out your phone and take a picture. No, back then, with film, you take a picture, you don't know what it looks like until you develop it, right? And you only had something like 30 shots per roll of film, and so you were a little bit more careful with what you shot with your camera. So anyway, that was the first camera that I've ever used, was that Kodak film camera, and I think I was just finishing high school, so when I was about 18, the year must have been about 2002, I went on a trip to Taiwan, and so my parents let me take that camera with me to take pictures. So here I was, an 18-year-old kid visiting Taiwan with a camera. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to go back again. We don't travel to Taiwan very often, and so I didn't really hold back. I took a ton of pictures. I was there for about a month, and I think I went through something like 7 rolls of film, which worked out to something on the order of about 200 pictures. And that was, to me, a lot at the time. I'd never seen that many rolls of film. I'd never taken that many pictures. I realize that now that's nothing, but back then, especially for film, it was a big deal. And I shot all those pictures in Taiwan, and I had no idea what they looked like until I brought them back to Canada and developed them. So that was my first ever camera. Now, towards the end of that trip in Taiwan, my grandparents from my father's side, they bought me a digital camera. It was an Olympus C2 Zoom, I believe. Well, I looked at pictures and I think that's the model. So I remember being just absolutely flabbergasted because, digital cameras were available then. But, it still wasn't like super common. I remember there were people my age, my peers who had digital cameras. But film cameras were still very popular. And so, I didn't have any issues rocking a film camera. I wasn't embarrassed about rocking a film camera. But yeah, I was like flabbergasted that they would spend that much money to buy me a digital camera. It just seemed like an extravagant and extremely generous gift. So when I received that, I called my parents and I told them about it, and we had this big discussion about whether or not I could accept such an extravagant gift. Now, in the end, we ended up accepting it, with the thought that we would, take pictures and send pictures to my grandparents. So that was my first ever digital camera, was the Olympus C2 Zoom. And I really enjoyed it because, you didn't have to worry about film so much. Now, back then, with those digital cameras, you still had to take the picture through the viewfinder, okay? There was a back LCD screen that lets you review the pictures after you took them, but while you were actually taking the picture, you still had to look through the viewfinder. So there were some changes that I had to get used to when transitioning to a digital camera. So number one, instead of having to pay attention to how many photos I had left on that roll of film, I had to pay attention to the amount of space in the card. And I think it was a compact flash card, which wasn't a huge deal, but more than that, I had to pay attention to the battery. Because you see, with the film camera, I don't remember what battery used. It wasn't a common type of battery. It wasn't like a AA or a AAA. It was a special kind of battery. It was still pretty small, but it lasted for a long, long time. Months, maybe a year, right? And so we didn't have to change the batteries very often. But with a digital camera, this Olympus C2 Zoom, it used, I think, 2 AA batteries, and we had to replace it not infrequently, right? Because every time, with a film camera, you use the battery whenever you took a picture, right? But with the digital camera, even if you're not taking a picture, you're still using battery power. If you're reviewing pictures on the back LCD screen, you're using battery power. And so we went through batteries a lot quicker with the digital camera. That took some getting used to. And in fact, it was for that reason, I believe, we got into the rechargeable battery game. So we got some rechargeable batteries. I think they were nickel cadmium batteries at first. And I think eventually we ended up also getting nickel metal hydride batteries. And those were okay, but at the time, those batteries, they had even less capacity than traditional alkaline AA batteries, so they ran out even faster. And then what's more is when they died, they tended to die very abruptly. So you saw that low battery icon, and it wasn't much longer after that the camera would just die immediately. So that was a real inconvenience associated with digital cameras. But that said, I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed taking pictures, and then if it turned out bad, you could just delete it right away, and then go on and retake the picture. There was less uncertainty compared to a film camera, and that was nice. Another thing, obviously, you had to get used to is that with film cameras, you pretty much printed all the pictures, because that's the only way you could see the pictures, was you had to print them. So we would have a physical copy of those pictures, and put them in these albums, and you can flip through them later. With digital cameras and digital photos, well, we didn't have to print them to look at them, and so actually the majority of them didn't end up getting printed. So we would just copy the pictures and put them onto my computer, and we just look at them on my computer. This was back before the days of Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. So those pictures pretty much just lived on my computer. So shortly after that Olympus C2 zoom camera, we ended up getting another digital camera also as a gift. This one came from a friend of my mom's, and it was a Canon PowerShot A70, and it was a smaller camera compared to the Olympus C2 zoom, but it took 4 AA batteries, so it had a longer battery life. So I really enjoyed that. And what's more, this Canon A70 had a bunch of features that the Olympus camera did not have. It had more buttons and allowed more manual control of the picture taking. So it lets you choose the shutter speed, it lets you choose the aperture. It even allowed you to manually adjust the focus. Now there was no focus ring or anything on it. You had to adjust it using buttons, but at least it let you do that. Now I didn't use it that often. It was a very clunky way of adjusting focus, so I didn't end up using it that often. But just the idea of having that option, to me it was magical. And it was that camera that really got me to be a Canon fanboy. So after that camera, I pretty much only wanted to buy Canon cameras. I was only interested in Canon cameras. I should say at this point, shortly after getting the PowerShot A70, the Olympus camera died. It just wouldn't turn on anymore. So shortly after getting the Canon A70, we looked at getting another digital camera. I think it was for my sister, and so we looked at redeeming a camera using our air miles points. And again, being a Canon fanboy, I chose to get a Canon ELPH series camera. So the ELPH series cameras are these really compact digital cameras. So we got a really nice looking one. I think it was silver and black. It looked really classy. I can't remember the exact model number. I tried looking it up online, but it's not easy to find pictures of the old models, and so so I don't remember what the model number is. But Canon made a lot of them, and I don't think it's really that important to the exact model. But it was a nice silver and black model, and really classy looking and very compact. And I think that was primarily used by my sister. So shortly after that, we also looked at getting a second Canon ELPH camera for me, because I was leaving for medical school. And again, we used our air miles to redeem the camera, and it was another Canon ELPH camera. It was a blue and gray one. It was a little bit of a newer model. It had some rounded corners and stuff. It didn't look quite as classy, but more or less the same in terms of capability. And I got a bright blue one because I wanted it to look different. So I used that camera for a little while. Like I said, I got it when I was leaving for medical school, so that must have been around 2006. And I used that camera. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, so if I wanted to take pictures, that was what I used. Then in 2010, I was leaving for residency, and that was when I got my first smartphone. The iPhone 4 came out that year, and I was super pumped about it. That was back when Steve Jobs was still giving the keynotes, And I remember seeing that keynote announcement. I was just so excited to get an iPhone 4, and so I was in residency at the time, and I was working when the phone was released. And because I was working, I couldn't go and line up and pick one up. But when I finished work, at the end of the day, I called around to some phone shops to see if any were still around, or if any were still available. And most places were sold out, right? And I specifically wanted the black one, the black iPhone 4. And like I said, most places were sold out, but I did manage to find one phone shop in a mall like halfway across town. So I drove all the way there and picked one up. And thereafter, the iPhone 4 became my main camera. In retrospect, I think the pictures coming out of my Canon ELPH was better quality than the iPhone 4, but you just can't beat the convenience. I always had the iPhone on me, and so it was much easier to get pictures with that than with the camera. Sure, if I went out and there was a special occasion, I would make sure to bring the camera with me. But most of the time, I didn't have my camera, and so I would use my phone. So after a couple of years of using the iPhone as my main camera, it became obvious that these compact point and shoots weren't being used, and so I ended up giving them to my parents. The other one as well, the other Canon ELPH. I think both of them are currently at my parents' house. They both still work, but obviously neither of us nobody's using them now. Those cameras also marked the first time that we had cameras with proprietary rechargeable batteries. Right? All the cameras beforehand used AA batteries, so these cameras use rechargeable batteries, and they work pretty well. Battery life was not terrible on those. I was in residency for a little while, and after a few years, I think it was around 2013, my sister was getting married, and I wanted to have a nice camera to take pictures of the wedding. And the reason was because I was starting to learn more about photography during my residency, and I wanted to own a more capable camera. I think a big part of that was because one of my co-residents, he had a side gig as a wedding photographer, and so he had a very nice Canon camera and a nice set of lenses, and yeah, I was blown away by his photography. And so, like I said, I think it was around 2013 I started looking into cameras again, and you bet I was looking at Canon cameras again. Again, because of my own history with Canon, and also because my co-resident used Canon. But at the time, I was coming from compact cameras and just iPhone photography, so I was used to shooting by looking at the back screen. I didn't use the viewfinder to take pictures, and I hadn't done that in many years. And so when I was looking at SLR cameras, I was looking for something that allowed for the performance, the autofocus performance of an SLR camera, but also allowed me to shoot with live view. That's what Canon called it, live view. However, at the time, Canon's implementation of live view was very bad. Like, it used only contrast detect autofocus. So even though you had an SLR camera and it had face detect autofocus, that was only available if you were shooting through the viewfinder. If you use live view, the mirror was up, and so the phase detect autofocus sensors were not being used, and it was just contrast based. And the contrast based autofocus was just remarkably slow. Like, it was worse than on those compact digital cameras. Those compact digital cameras also used contrast based autofocus, but they were faster than the DSLR offerings at the time. And so it was for this reason that I ended up looking at Sony, because Sony had around then introduced the SLT system. Okay, so it's an SLR format, but it allowed for a DSLR autofocus performance, very fast autofocus performance, while still allowing you to shoot using the back LCD screen with live view. And the way it did that, I don't want to make this whole video about how it works, but the way it works is, in traditional SLR cameras, there's a mirror that is mostly a mirror, okay, and it reflected most of the incoming image up to the viewfinder. It's a little bit translucent, so that it allows some of the light to go through and then be reflected down to phase detect autofocus sensors. And then when it came time to take a picture, the mirror would completely move out of the way, and then you would expose the imaging sensor. The SLT system was slightly different in that the mirror was mostly translucent. So most of the light coming in through the lens went to that imaging sensor. And so the imaging sensor was being used to also give you the live view on the back LCD screen. So nothing was being reflected up to the viewfinder. Now the SLT cameras all included a viewfinder, but they were digital viewfinders. They weren't optical viewfinders. And I know that that had been done previously by other cameras and other camera manufacturers, and I know there were some bad examples of digital viewfinders, but Sony actually had a very good implementation with their SLT cameras, and I never had any issues with it. So that sort of perceived downside of not having a optical viewfinder was largely irrelevant. But anyway, so they had a mostly translucent mirror, like I said, that allowed the image to go through to the imaging sensor. But it was a small part of that light was being reflected down towards the phase detect sensor, just like in a traditional DSLR. But the mirror didn't have to move out of the way to take the picture, and so you had that phase detect autofocusing system running full time, and you were able to get a live view image on the back LCD. So because of all of this, I ended up getting a Sony Alpha 65. I love that camera, and to this day I still have that camera and I still use it. In fact, for my work, I still use that Alpha 65. Even though I now also own the A6400, for reasons I won't get into in this video, my primary camera that I use at work is still my Alpha 65. So I've had that Sony Alpha 65 as my main DSLR camera since about 2013. And that served me just fine, but as you can tell, more recently I've started to make YouTube videos. And unfortunately, the SLT, the Alpha 65, was not really designed with video in mind. It of course can record videos, but there are all kinds of issues with it, just sort of inconvenience factors associated with it. And that kind of made me start looking for another camera. So what were some of the problems with the Alpha 65 as a video camera? Well, first of all, in order to have phase detect autofocus, a continuous autofocus in video, it was great that he could even offer that, but in order to have that, you would have to stop down to f3.5. So I had a f2.8 lens, but it didn't matter. The camera would automatically stop it down to 3.5. And so of course that hurt its low light performance. Another inconvenience was the fact that it could record in 1080p, which is fine. That's all I wanted of it. The 4K wasn't a thing when I got the camera, and even now I don't record in 4K. But at 1080p, it could only record in 2 frame rates, 24 frames per second or 60 frames per second. And you might think that that's just fine. Those are the 2 most common frame rates. But the rolling shutter at 24 frames was absolutely terrible. And so, yeah, if you locked off your shot on a tripod, 24 frames was fine. But if you walked around a little bit, the image looked like it was jello, and so it was unusable. So basically, for video, I was shooting only at 60 frames per second, 1080p, and that was fine. And it's the reason why actually I shoot all my videos at 30 frames a second currently now, because it was easier to just half the frame rate out of my Alpha 65. Plus also iPhone videos were shot at 30 frames a second for the most part. Anyway, it goes on from there. The Sony Alpha 65 had only 15 autofocus points. So those autofocus points didn't cover much of the frame, and it was very easy for you to end up outside of one of those autofocus points, and the camera would struggle to focus on you. If you look at some of my older videos, you'll notice that occasionally the camera will go in and out of focus, even though I'm mostly just sitting there pretty stationary. The Alpha 65 was very good at recognizing your face, so it would always be able to detect my face. It would put a box around my face, so it knew that it was there, but your face still had to be in one of those autofocus points for it to focus. And for that reason, autofocus was not very reliable for video using the Alpha 65. And then finally, the other issue with it is that the audio preamps weren't very good. The built-in microphones were like okay, but nobody ever wants to record using built-in microphones because the camera typically sits far away, and so the camera's microphone would also be far away. And generally, you want the microphones to be as close to you as possible. And the Sony Alpha 65 did have a mic in port, which is great, and I did plug in microphones. But the thing is, the preamps were very good, and it only allowed for auto leveling. There was no manual. You couldn't set a manual level. And so that means that when you were talking, sure, it would sound okay, but if you stopped talking for even a few seconds, you can hear that background start to get ramped up. The gain starts to get ramped up, and you start hearing this roar from the background. It was terrible. Like, audio was absolutely terrible on the Alpha 65, and it was for that reason that I got the Zoom H1n, so that I could record audio off camera, and then I would sync it in post. So these are all problems with doing video with the Alpha 65, and as I got into doing more and more videos for YouTube, I just needed a better solution. And I again wanted to go back to Canon, and for a little while I was considering the M50. In fact, I almost pulled the trigger and I almost bought the M50. We were sitting in an airport in Ottawa, and I had that M50 in my cart. I think it was at Best Buy. It was on a Best Buy website, and it was in my cart. And I almost bought it, but we were thinking, well, where were we going to ship it to? We're going to ship it to Canada, or we're going to ship it to the United States. So we actually held off a little bit, and then soon after, the Sony A6400 was announced. And when I looked at the feature set, specifically the just absolutely kick-ass face detect autofocus and in video, and the eye autofocus for photos. I was like, yeah, I needed that camera. And so even though I tried to escape to back to Canon, I ended up getting another Sony camera. And so shortly thereafter I got the A6400. I think it was also a day one purchase, much like my iPhone 4. All right, so I got the A6400, and now I don't use the Alpha 65 for the most part. That's primarily a photo camera for me now. If I want to record video, I'll use the A6400. But you'll notice that a lot of my videos are also shot on the iPhone, and that's because, again, the portability can't be beat with these smartphone cameras. I usually have my iPhone on me. I don't always have my A6400 on me. What's more, these iPhone cameras are getting better and better, and so it's getting harder and harder to justify lugging around a camera just to shoot a video. So anyway, so that's my history with cameras. Just a quick recap. I started with a Kodak film camera, then it was an Olympus C2 Zoom digital camera, then it was a Canon A70 PowerShot digital camera, followed by two Canon ELPH compact digital cameras. Then after that it was the Sony Alpha 65. Well, I should say after that it was the iPhone 4, and then was the Sony Alpha 65, and then most recently, my most recent acquisition is the Sony A6400. So what's next? What's in the future for me camera-wise? I don't know. I'm actually not interested in getting another camera. I'm not in the market for another camera. I'm not interested in going full frame. That was something I thought about a little bit, before I got the A6400. But really, I just don't want to deal with full frame. It's not just that they're expensive; they're also typically bigger, and the lenses are also bigger and heavier. And the lenses are generally also much more expensive. So I know that there are affordable full frame offerings right now, but full frame lenses are still just they're just way more expensive, and you can't get away from that. Yeah, I mean, it's already a pain carrying around a crop sensor A6400. You can't imagine having to carry around a full frame camera. So yeah, no, I have no plans to go full frame right now. In fact, I have to say probably the most interesting camera for me lately has been the Insta360 camera, and also the GoPro cameras, the GoPro Hero 8 and the GoPro Hero Max. If you look at what you can achieve from those cameras, it's fantastic. These 360 cameras give you footage that you really can't get using traditional cameras. And then the GoPro Hero 8 is also very interesting to me because it's very small, very light, and the stability and the image stabilization just cannot be beat. So I would say, even though I'm not really looking at buying another camera, the camera that currently interests me the most is actually a GoPro. So anyway, that's it. I'll see you in the next one.